Uh, we're on Genesis chapter 31, 22 through 42.
Okay. Laban didn't learn of their flight for 3 days. Then, taking several men with him, he set out in hot pursuit and caught up with them 7 days later at Mount Gilead. That night, God appeared to Laban in a dream. Watch out what you say to Jacob, he was told. Don't give him your blessing and don't curse him. Laban finally caught up with Jacob as he was camped at the top of a ridge. Laban, meanwhile, camped below him in the mountains. What do you mean by sneaking off like this? Laban demanded. Are my daughters prisoners, captured in a battle, that you have rushed them away like this? Why didn't you give me a chance to have a farewell party with singing and orchestra and harp? Why didn't you let me kiss my grandchildren and tell them goodbye? This is a strange way to act. I could crush you, but the God of your father appeared to me last night and told me, be careful not to be too hard on Jacob. But see here, though you feel you must go and long so intensely for your childhood home, why have you stolen my idols? 31. I sneaked away because I was afraid, Jacob answered. I said to myself, he'll take his daughters from me by force. But as for your household idol, a curse upon anyone who took them. Let him die. If you find a single thing we've stolen from you, I swear before all these men, I'll give it back without question. For Jacob didn't know that Rachel had taken them. 33. Laban went first into Jacob's tent to search there, then into Leah's, and then searched the two tents of the concubines, but didn't find them. Finally, he went into Rachel's tent. Rachel, remember, was the one who had stolen the idols. She had stuffed them into her camel saddle and now was sitting on them. So, although Laban searched the tents thoroughly, he didn't find them. Did you say through?
42.
Okay, 35. Forgive my not getting up, Father, Rachel explained, but I'm having my monthly period. So Laban didn't find them. Now Jacob got mad. What did you find? He demanded of Laban. What is my crime? You have come rushing after me as though you were chasing a criminal and have searched through everything. Now put everything I stole out here in front of us before your men and mine for all to see and to decide whose it is. 20 years I've been with you, and all that time I cared for your ewes and goats so that they produced healthy offspring, and I never touched one ram of yours for food. If any were attacked and killed by wild animals, did I show them to you and ask you to reduce the count of your flock? No, I took the loss. You made me pay for every animal stolen from the flocks, whether I could help it or not. I worked for you through the scorching heat of the day and through the cold and sleepless nights. Yes, 20 years, 14 of them earning your two daughters, and 6 years to get the flock. And you have reduced my wages 10 times. In fact, except for the grace of God, the God of my grandfather Abraham, even the glorious God of Isaac, my father, you would have sent me off without a penny to my name. But God has seen your cruelty and my hard work, and that is why he appeared to you last night. 43.
No, we're done there. 42.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that God went to Laban and said, do not say anything to him. And what does he do?
Says something.
He went, I'm like, if God told me not to say anything, like I'd be like, "Mm,"
What I want to know is why did Rachel having her period have anything to do with her standing up?
because when they were on their period, they didn't get up. They were considered dirty. So they
Oh,
even had back then they had red tents. Like when you had your period that the ladies could go sit in the red tent. They weren't allowed to go to synagogue. So it was like a huge deal whenever they were bleeding because it was blood and blood is life.
okay.
It
Yeah.
kind of it surprises me that when God came to Laban in a dream, he just accepts that God said, "Don't do this," but he didn't believe in God.
Yeah,
That
your God
just
appeared to me. Yeah, you're right.
Blows my mind.
But obviously it didn't matter because even though God told him that, he did it anyway. So
Yeah, he didn't care, but he wasn't
irregardless,
impressed.
right.
Hmm. Yeah. All right. So mine picks up at 23. 7 days. That it took so long for Laban's band to catch up with a much larger group burdened with possessions and animals indicates a forced march was undertaken by Jacob's people, probably motivated by Jacob's fear. Well, that's a good point. 24. Be careful, either good or bad. God again sovereignly protected as he had done for Abraham and Isaac to prevent harm from coming to his man in a proverbial expression of no, in a proverbial expression, Laban is cautioned not to use anything in the full range of options open to him, from good to bad, to alter the existing situation and bring Jacob back. 26. My daughters like captives. Laban evidently did not believe that his daughters could have possibly agreed with the departure and must have left under duress. 27 through 29. Laban's questions protested his right to have arranged a proper send off for his family and functioned as a rebuke of Jacob's thoughtlessness towards him. Sounds a little manipulative to me, but verse 30. Why did you steal my gods? Longing to return to Canaan might excuse his leaving without notice, but it could not excuse the theft of the teraphim, the gods. Laban's thorough search for these idols also marked how important they were to him as a pagan worshiper. 31. Afraid. A reasonable fear is experienced by Jacob, who had come to find a wife and stayed for at least 20 years under the selfish compulsions of Laban. 34 through and 35. Dishonest deed needed further dishonesty and trickery to cover it up. 35. The way of women. Rachel claims she was having her menstrual period. 37. Decide between us two. Rachel's theft and dishonest cover-up had precipitated a major conflict between her father and her husband that could only be resolved by judicial inquiry before witnesses. 38 through 42. Jacob registered his complaint that he had unfairly borne the losses normally carried by the owner and had endured so much discomfort in fulfilling his responsibility. Jacob also delivered his conclusion that night for the oversight of Laban. Laban may have very well fleeced him totally. 42. Fear of Isaac. Also see the fear of his father Isaac. This was another divine name signifying Jacob's identification of the God who caused Isaac to reverence him. The God that caused Isaac to reverence him. I was also thinking about something here about Rachel. Oh, he basically signed her death warrant because he said, in verse 32, anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. Okay, that was all for Tony.
Okay, 22 through 42. Confrontation. Since a 3 days journey lay between Laban's settlement and that of Jacob, it took that long for the word to get to Laban that his son-in-law had bolted, and by the time Laban got the news, Jacob was far away. It took a week for Laban to catch up with the fleeing family, and Jacob and Laban finally met in the hill country of Gilead. Laban tried to get the upper hand immediately by rebuking Jacob for the way he had stolen away from Padan Aram. Imagine this clever schemer asking Jacob, "Why did you run off secretly and deceive me?" Deceive him indeed. Laban had spent 20 years deceiving Jacob. But for all the blustering, Laban was helpless to harm Jacob because the Lord had warned him to be careful. God had promised to protect Jacob, and he kept his promise. But the thing that angered Laban the most was the fact that somebody had stolen his household gods, and he was sure the guilty person was in Jacob's family. He was right. It was Rachel who did the deed, but Jacob didn't know it. The fact that Laban was distressed shows that his faith was in the idols and not in the true God whom Jacob served. There's a note here. Why did Rachel steal her father's household idols? Archaeological evidence indicates that the person possessing such gods was guaranteed the family inheritance, but Rachel was leaving home and would have no inheritance coming. Rachel was deeply hurt because of the way her father had trained her, and this was her way of retaliating, and it's likely her faith in Jehovah wasn't that strong. It's possible that Laban used these idols for divination, and Rachel stole them in order to keep him from knowing too much. Later, Jacob commanded everybody in the family to give up their idols, and he buried them. Okay.
Oh, Jacob buried
Yeah,
them.
Jacob
So they
later,
never did get busted then.
apparently not.
But she does die early, so
By pretending to be unclean because of her monthly period, Rachel escaped detection and further trouble with her father. Watching his devious father-in-law arrogantly search through all the family's personal possessions made Jacob angry, and rightly so, and feelings were now released from his heart that had been buried there for 20 years. Jacob spoke openly of Laban's underhanded practices, how he had deceived Jacob, given him the hardest work, and changed his wages many times. God had blessed Laban because of Jacob, but Laban had never thanked either the Lord or Jacob, nor had he repaid Jacob for the animals he replaced at his own expense. But the most important thing in Jacob's speech was the way he gave honor to the Lord. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you at last. What a testimony from a man who was inclined to give in to others and do what he was told. And then there's another note here. The title, Fear of Isaac, is used only here and in verse 53. The Hebrew word simply means terror or dread, and therefore the God that Isaac feared
53?
suggests that others. What's that?
Did you say verse 53?
Yeah. It suggests that others ought to fear him as well. And then there are other references in Genesis for that.
What did it suggest again?
It says that the title, the fear of Isaac, is used only here and in verse 53.
Oh,
Now, I didn't look at 53 to see.
yeah, it is there. Okay, so where's the earlier one?
Okay, and it also says Genesis 15:1,
Oh,
Genesis 27:33, and in 28 and verse 17.
but where's it at in 31? Oh, here it is. I found
It
it.
would be,
Okay, you're saying it's used here?
in 31.
Yeah.
I don't know which
Or the other
verse
ones?
for. Did you find which verse?
Yes. 42.
Okay.
What were
And in verse 53 of chapter 31.
so only used in chapter 31?
Yeah. But then the other references, it says suggest that others ought to fear him as well. Now let me look at 15.
What was the reason for the fear, though? I'm sorry. I know you've already said it like 3 times.
The Hebrew word simply means terror or dread, and therefore the God that Isaac feared. So let me get back to where that was.
So the fear of Isaac was actually the
Fear.
fear of God.
Yes. But the most important thing in Jacob's speech was the way he gave honor to the Lord. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. That's verse 42. So basically, it sounds to me like that's meaning the fear of God.
So he's saying the only reason you didn't screw me over is because of the fear of God, because you know about my God,
I think
my
so.
father's God.
That's it through 42.
Okay. 31. Oh, mine's very short. So here we go. A week later, the two parties met, and Laban scolded Jacob for sneaking away, taking his daughters like prisoners of war. What had most irked Laban, however, was the disappearance of his household gods, which Rachel had stolen on their way out of town. Perhaps she took them because she, like her father, believed they brought good luck. Perhaps she was just paying her father back for the terrible way he had treated her and Jacob. Either way, her theft was risky, and she was only able to cover it up by stashing the idols under a saddle, sitting on it, and explaining that she was having her period and therefore couldn't rise. Then my next section goes through 55, which is the end. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it because the next section is pretty short. Jacob, unaware that Rachel really had committed this crime, went on a counterattack against Laban. He chronicled all the ways he had worked hard for Laban, while Laban only took advantage of him. Laban remained unmoved, responding, "The daughters you took are my daughters, the sons my sons, and the flocks my flocks." Which was not true, as he had given the daughters in marriage and agreed to give Jacob the speckled flocks. But realizing that he couldn't weasel his way out of the situation, Laban tried to limit the loss, proposing that a covenant be between them. The terms of the covenant were meant to keep Jacob and Laban apart, and God was at work through Laban's covenant to finally end the connection between the two men. All right, so I think we need to go now and read through the end. Kim, are you up to reading 43 through the end of chapter 31?
You're muted.
All right, 31:43. Laban replied, "These women are my daughters, and these children are mine, and these flocks and all that you have, all are mine. So how could I harm my own daughters and grandchildren? Come now, and we will sign a peace pact, you and I, and will live by its terms." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a monument, and told his men to gather stones and make a heap. And Jacob and Laban ate together beside the pile of rocks. They named it the witness pile, Jagar Sahadutha in Laban's language, and Gilead in Jacob's. "This pile of stones will stand as a witness against us if either of us trespasses across this line," Laban said. So it was also called the watchtower, Mitzpah. For Laban said, "May the Lord see to it that we keep this bargain when we are out of each other's sight. And if you are harsh to my daughters or take other wives, I won't know, but God will see it. This heap," Laban continued, "stands between us as a witness of our vows that I will not cross this line to attack you, and you will not cross it to attack me. I call upon the God of Abraham and Nahor, and of their father to destroy either one of us who does." So Jacob took oath before the mighty God of his father Isaac to respect the boundary line. 54. Then Jacob presented a sacrifice to God there at the top of the mountain and invited his companions to a feast, and afterwards spent the night with them on the mountain. Laban was up early the next morning and kissed his daughters and grandchildren and blessed them and returned home.
I'm thinking that he must have had the mindset of Pan, like where they had like multiple gods. They didn't have one God they worshiped. Like, so this God's just another God. because he's saying God's a witness, and if you don't do this, then he's going to, like, he's giving credit for him being powerful.
Well, is it different when they say God, and then in verse 49, may the Lord see to it that we keep this bargain? Do they, even those who think there's other gods, do they use the Lord and God, those words interchangeably?
Well, that Lord there is all capitalized, so I'm guessing he's meaning the sovereign Lord or the sovereign God, our God.
I have a footnote here for 49 in my Bible. To be binding, an agreement had to be witnessed by a third party. In this case, Jacob and Laban used God as their witness that they would keep their word. So I'm like you, Kim. I think I kind of question that if Laban didn't really believe in God, but yet they're going to use him as a witness.
But if
It
that were
seemed a
true,
little
like
odd.
the benefit on Laban's side is that his daughters and his grandchildren would be protected. So if he didn't believe that there was a God, like,
I thought it was interesting in verse um, 47 and 48, that pile of rocks, so together, Jacob and Laban, they named it the witness pile. But in Laban's, so they had different languages. In Laban's language, that was Jagar Sahadutha, but in Jacob's language, it was Galid. So they had different languages. I don't know what those would be.
must have meant the same thing though, because it says this heap
Yeah.
is a witness between you and me today.
Yeah. So the witness pile is what they called it. They agreed would be the name, but then it had a different name in Laban's language and a third name in Jacob's language, meaning all meaning the witness pile.
I think it's really interesting too that he's very concerned about him taking on other wives besides his two daughters. Like after he
Yeah.
sold his daughters,
Suddenly that's a thing though, to have more
suddenly he
than one.
cares about his daughters.
And he already did because he had the concubines.
I kind of think maybe Laban said, swear by the Lord, because he knows Joseph's not, or Jacob's not going to swear by anything that he puts out there.
Oh, that's a good
That
point.
that thought crossed my mind too, Julie.
Yeah.
Just kind of going along with this because this is Jacob's Lord,
Yep.
just using the same words.
Well, let's see what John says. In 43, Laban pled his case, amounting to nothing more than the manifestation of his grasping character by claiming everything is his. 44, let's make a covenant. Although Laban did regard all in Jacob's hands as his, after all, Jacob had arrived 20 years before with nothing. Nevertheless, the matter was clearly ruled in Jacob's favor, since Laban left with nothing. A treaty was struck in the customary fashion in which they covenanted not to harm one another again, with heaps of stones as testaments to the treaty, named in a place with the consecration meals having been eaten, and with the appropriate oaths and statements made in the name of their God. The agreement was properly sanctioned and concluded, and thus they parted company. All contact between Abraham's kin in Canaan and Mesopotamia appears to have ended at this point. 47 through 49. Jigar Sahadutha and Galid Mizpah. The first two words mean in Aramaic and also in Hebrew, heap of witnesses. The third word means watch post. In verse 53, God of Nahor. Laban's probable syncretistic syncretistic paralleling of God of Abraham with that of Nahor and Terah, his brother and father, respectfully. Oh, that's right. Okay, well, Abraham was the one that was called out. I was gonna say he's part of Abraham's family. Anyway, it elicited Jacob again using the fear of his father Isaac, a reference to the true God, for he certainly could not give credence to any of Laban's allusions. Syncretistic allusions. He could not give credence to any of Laban's. Oh, so he was saying it's not any of the humans, it's God. Is that what that's saying? Laban's probable syncretistic paralleling of God of Abraham, the God of Abraham, with that of Nahor and Terah, his brother and father, respectfully, elicited Jacob again using the fear of his father Isaac, a reference to the true God. For he certainly could not give any credence to any of Laban's syncretistic allusions. So it wasn't Nahor or Terah's God, it was Isaac's God. Is that what he's saying?
I didn't know what that word meant. I just looked it up.
Yes, please help.
I never heard that word. And it says, here's another word that I might have to look up, but it says the amalgamation or attempted amalgamation of different religions, cultures, or schools of thought.
Well,
So
like an algorithm would be like things like working together.
I think what they're saying is they couldn't give credence to these gods that Laban believes in or has faith in and it's not just one, it's a conglomeration. So Laban's conglomeration of gods give no credence, so they gave reference to the God of Isaac instead because
He is the God.
correct, yeah.
that word amalgamation kind of means combining or uniting.
Yeah, so multiple gods. And then I think Jacob's coming back and saying, no, my father's God, the Lord, capital Lord.
I relate it to like all these religions, that's one God in one heaven. That's my thoughts.
Because it's Jacob who's saying that. So he's actually he's like solidifying, this is truly, I am committing to this. Because he says, if my father, the God of Abraham, if the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely you would have sent me away empty-handed. All right, Kathy.
Okay, 43 through 55, truce. God's warning in the dream and Jacob's forceful defense told Laban that he was beaten, but the old deceiver put on a brave front just the same and tried to make everybody think he was a peacemaker. Both families gathered stones and ate a meal together on those stones as a symbol of the agreement they had reached. Eating a meal together is an Eastern custom when creating a binding agreement. The pile of stones was to stand as a witness to the agreement that they had made, but it was also to be a watchtower or mizpah, or boundary marker that neither Jacob nor Laban was allowed to cross. Actually, their agreement wasn't a declaration of peace. It was only a truce that could be broken if either party violated the terms. It's too bad the so-called Mizpah benediction is still found in many Christian hymnals.
Really?
That's what it says.
Let me look that up.
Okay.
It says, may the Lord keep and watch between us to make sure that we keep this. You know how that goes. May the Lord watch between you and me while we're absent one from another.
Yep, Genesis
Okay.
31:49. The Lord watch between you and me, between me and thee, while we are absent from one another.
Well, that's what it has here, 31 verse 49. Okay, because what Laban said to Jacob wasn't a benediction at all in verses 48 and 49. To paraphrase, he said, "We're separating from one another, but God is watching both of us. If you mistreat my daughters, I won't know it, but God will, so be careful." Laban didn't see the God of Abraham and Isaac as a gracious Lord who had brought them together, but as a heavenly judge who would keep them both from harming each other. In spite of their oaths, Jacob and Laban didn't trust each other, so they had to trust the Lord to keep them from harming each other. Mizpah was a monument to suspicion and fear, not to love and trust. Jacob closed the day by offering sacrifice to the Lord and inviting his relatives to share in the sacrificial meal. He wanted the God of his fathers to be honored before this pagan family that had caused him so much grief. The next morning, Laban said his farewells and returned home, and a long and difficult chapter in Jacob's life came to a close, a chapter in which God was with him from the beginning to the end. But a new chapter would soon open in which his own brother Esau would play a prominent part. Life isn't easy, but if we submit to God's disciplines and let him guide us in our decisions, we can endure the difficulties triumphantly and develop the kind of character that glorifies God. We can conquer by claiming promises like 1 Peter 5:10. But may the God of all grace, who called us to his eternal glory by Christ Jesus, after you have suffered a while, perfect, establish, strengthen, and settle you. The God of Jacob never fails. That's it.
Kathy, what did you say that when this wasn't of a treaty of love and peace or whatever, but
It was the Mizpah was a monument to suspicion and fear, not to love and trust.
wait a minute.
Monument.
To
To suspicion and fear, not to love and trust.
thank you.
That must have been back when someone's word meant something. Because he was trusting like they wouldn't come past that pillar to harm each other.
So when it said there, this just came to my mind. When it said there about, okay, this was like a marker, like neither one could cross those boundaries.
To do
Is
harm.
that, yes. Does that have anything to do with today, where the countries are, I wonder?
I bet you're right. I bet it does somewhere.
I mean, I don't know. I'm just kind of wondering if some of the reason there isn't fighting going on, if somewhere along the line something wasn't crossed there. Maybe not.
I mean, I think that that's a reasonable thought that it would have been a boundary for those people in those days.
Can somebody tell me again whose Laban's people would be today versus
That, yeah, that's what I was wondering too. Like who's Laban's relatives? Like where have they gone? And
Laban. Let's look here. Laban. Well, okay, so it would have been where his sons went, not because his daughters would have been part of the line of Jesus. Laban's people today would be Laban. Let's see, Laban in Genesis chapter 31. It doesn't say.
that might have been a far reach, but
My this little commentary from Warren it is better to declare a truce than to wage a war, but the best decision of all is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And it's Psalm 133:1. and then see Ephesians 4:25-32 for directions, which I think I'm relating it to like everything that's going on. It's, in past times we always went to war, and we need world peace. That's what God would want for Jesus's return. That's just my thoughts. Psalm 133 is brotherly unity. That's what that's titled in my Bible.
This says Laban was Armenian who resided in Padan Aram. His daughters Leah and Rachel. Therefore, Laban is biological grandfather of the 8 tribes of Israel. 8 tribes because the other kids were born to the concubines. Legal grandfather of all 12 tribes. Syria, like mainly Syria, which makes total sense with Israel. All right. Any other thoughts? If not, our trivia question lines up with our lesson. You guys will be screaming this. Kim, are you delving into something else?
Well, I was, but it's nothing I can do quickly.
Okay. The question is, who were Jacob's 2 wives?
Rachel and Leah.
Rachel and Leah.
You guys are so smart. And guess where you can find that? Genesis 29:15-30. Look how smart you are.
We all get an A
at a
plus.
good time.
You all get gold stars. What did you say, Kathy?
You caught us at a good time.
Yeah. All right. This concludes the reading of God's word for today. Until Monday.
For sure.
Have a great weekend, ladies.